Bernie. Yeah, so my name's Mark. I'm from Australia, and so thanks for having me here at Hope. Just before I start, I wanted to let you know I probably may channel into a North Korean during part of my talk. My 9-to-5 job, I'm a biomedical engineer, but this is my true passion, what I've been living for the last 4 years. This project's coming to an end, and I've got a new project planned, a totally different part of the world, but a very similar type of country. And so as I channel myself, I might find myself just starting to use terms that are quite common in North Korean propaganda. Because I'm presenting to Americans, and sorry to say, North Koreans don't like you very much. I hope you won't be offended when I say things like American dogs or imperialist aggressors. Are you okay with that? Yeah. All right. In that case, I'm going to put on my North Korean jacket. And we'll get underway. The last session was really fascinating. So because there's vision impaired people in the audience, I do have a couple of slides which are only text, so I'll also speak the words. Anyone can get a copy of this presentation. Everything I'm doing is Creative Commons. It's free to share. Some of my friends have pieces in the presentation. I don't want to speak for how they want their information passed on, but anyway, go for it. So the Korean DMZ is what most people see, like what most Westerners see. And this is what you're likely to see if you go there.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to UNC Checkpoint 3. As you were told in your slide brief that once upon arriving here, you'd be surrounded on 3 sides by communist North Korea. At this time, I'm going to show you how. If you look directly to your right about 50 meters in the tree line, you'll see a black and yellow panel marker. As the tree line goes down, forming a 90-degree angle, the MDL goes out, making an abrupt left, continuing to the Sachon River, continuing west into the Han Estuary. You cannot see what I'm mainly talking about, but you might be able to just a little bit. As you look out to the far distance, you'll see a hill. You'll see what looks to be a J-shaped or a hook-shaped dirt road. That is the northern portion of the DMZ, and it's approximately 2,000 meters from where we stand now. If you look amongst all the trees, you'll see another TAN building. KPA guard post number 5 is currently monitoring us at this time. So once again, please don't point, wave, or make any gestures towards North Korea in any way. As you look out to the field, once again, you might be able to see it, you might not. But you'll see a blue rooftop building. That is the former Czech and Polish NSC camp, however, is no longer used. North Korea claims it is their QRF, or Quick Reaction Force. However, we seldom see any vehicles or personnel there, so we give it the nickname North Korea's Slow Reaction Force. Now, if you look to your very far left, you'll see the large flagpole that stands in the village Gyeongdong, a propaganda village. As you can see, the flag is not flying well today. It takes a large gust of wind to get this flag flying, and it has a dry weight of 600 pounds. It must be lowered during inclement weather for it to tear under its own weight. You can't really make out the village, but if you remember from your slide brief, you had seen that it looks like a really nice place to live. Well, it is more or less a multi-million-dollar Hollywood prop set. All these buildings pretty much are mostly uninhabited. The way we know this is from when North Korea does have electricity, they'll have bright lights at the very top floor, and they'll just dim down as it gets towards the bottom floor. That's how we also know there's no floors inside these buildings. There's also some windows and doors even painted on.
So basically, most people only get to see North Korea by saying, well, you can't really see it, but behind these trees, and kind of have to use your imagination. I decided I wanted to get behind the trees and see what's actually there. My project is called Behind the Curtain. It's a multimedia project, essentially an e-book, which runs on iPads, Macs, and so on, and will be on other devices as well. But just a bit about North Korea. Also, you might hear me use the term DPRK, that stands for Democratic Republic of North Korea. As probably most of you know, if the word democratic appears in the name of your nation, you can pretty well count that it's not democratic. There's no freedom, there's no outside information. The people are isolated and ignorant. There's torture, public executions, and concentration camps. And the population is 24.5 million people, which is just slightly more than the country I'm from, Australia, and essentially close to 100% of those people are brainwashed. It's certainly the strangest country, strangest nation on the planet. But they're real people as well. People ride the subway to work, they hate their boss, they fight with their wives. So, you know, we can quite often think of North Koreans as drones and robots, but they are real people as well. My project, as I said, behind the curtain, I've been interested in North Korea for quite some time. It wasn't just North Korea. I was interested in growing up as a teenager during the Cold War, very interested in the Soviet Union, Albania, East Germany, and so on. All of those countries have changed. Even China has changed. If you ever go there, it's communist by name and political system, but certainly doesn't look like a communist country any longer. North Korea is the last of all of these countries. And in fact, I have an interest like Bernie in radio, and the first time I wrote to the North Koreans was when I was 13 years old. And this is the postcard they sent me back after I heard their radio station. In my home in Sydney, Australia, I actually have a large satellite dish and other equipment so I can watch North Korean television and receive Korean radio. Television runs for about 5 hours a day, radio runs for 18 hours a day. So I actually consume a lot of that information for this project. But consuming it from outside the country, all the way in Australia, I was kind of felt that I was really missing out on things, so I decided to do some work on the ground. Going in, originally when I went into North Korea, you weren't able to take things like your phones were taken off you, confiscated. They were sealed in a great big plastic bag with heaps of tape around it and handed back to you as you left the country at the Chinese border. So for the types of information I wanted to collect local information, particularly the mass media, electronic mass media. It meant that I had to disguise equipment to take in. So here you can see various radios, recorders and so on disguised as MP3 players, a USB memory stick, and inside this camera body is a radio as well. And one thing you could get in was a laptop. In fact, it's the very same laptop I'm presenting from today, a MacBook. And the reason you can get that into North Korea is that there's no internet, there's no Wi-Fi, so there's no ability to connect to the outside world. So they were feeling it was quite safe to allow me to have a laptop with me. If you look carefully there, you'll see that out of the USB stick is a wire coat hanger, and that's been specially crafted as a radio antenna. I collected data, radio transmissions, television transmissions, and then bring them back home to Australia to edit. Each trip, I've been to North Korea a total of 4 times. Each trip was about 6 months in the planning. I had to work out exactly what content I wanted, what I wanted to receive, and then usually many months of editing information when I get back, trawling through it. Really in country, I'm just sucking things up, and then when I get home, I've been going through it. The project itself, as I said, runs on an iPad, but there'll be no doubt an Android version as well, runs on a Mac. It's fully interactive. You touch the graphics and they all move. Lots of video, lots of audio, and so on. So what we're talking about today, a really brief introduction to North Korea, propaganda primer, social engineering, you know, how to conduct yourself in the country, smuggling gear in and media out, and the highlight is the death to the USA. And one thing I do have to be mindful of is speaking faster, because normally I present this over about 3 hours. I've cut it down a tiny bit, but I better get going. North Korea 101, what's the country about? So just a geography introduction. I'm from here. North Korea's up here. So to the west of Japan, you can see it there marked in red. This is actually a North Korean map, and then you can see both South Korea and North Korea are marked as one country. They don't recognise South Korea as a separate country. In fact, when you see the word South Korea written in North Korean documents, the S is always spelt with a lowercase s. This is the Korean Peninsula. So it sits in the Sea of Japan or the Sea of Korea, whichever you wish to call it. The bottom half is the south, the northern part is the north. Here's the two capital cities. The red one is Pyongyang, capital city of North Korea. The blue one, Seoul, capital city of South Korea. In fact, they're incredibly close together. The North Korean border is only about 36 kilometres north of Seoul. The country has land borders with Russia, and actually here's one of my minders, which I'll be introducing you to in a minute. He's actually pointing to where we're standing, which is right on a border town, and the yellow country there is Russia. On the other side over here, this is China. And a common, most North Korean propaganda, the imagery revolves around the flag. You'll see this everywhere, just like the Stars and Stripes are here in the United States. Well, I usually don't even call it a country, it's a racket. The regime is run by the Kim family for their own amusement, and they're incredibly corrupt, and the population are just their servants. Kim Il-sung founded the country. Kim Jong-il, you might remember he died December 2011, and the current one, Little Kim, or Fatty Kim, is Kim Jong-un. This is Kim Il-sung. Everywhere you go in the country, you're going to see statues of Kim Il-sung. These statues are kind of the equivalent of a church in their country. When you're married, if you felt you wanted to reflect or anything like that, you'd usually go to one of these statues in your town. Kim Il-sung liberated the country because the country doesn't really, in their version of history, doesn't know about the Second World War. They don't know about the efforts of the Americans at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they believe the Japanese were defeated pretty well single-handedly by Kim Il-sung. And as you can see here, being that Japan occupied Korea during the Second World War, as you can see here, Kim Il-sung is about to catch some Japanese. Kim Jong-il is a toddler on his mum's arm, and he's right in the battle there as well, and his mum's got a pistol firing. This is Kim Jong-il, so the one that died, the Kim that died a few years ago. Here he is as a young guy, and it's interesting, he's wearing a flower, which we're going to talk about a bit in a sec too. This place is called Paektusan, the secret camp, and most of the stories around North Korea are very similar to Bible stories. The Kim family, actually, if you go back in the Kim family, they actually were Christians, and the grandfather of Kim Il-sung was actually a Christian pastor. So a lot of the propaganda has been built around the Bible stories. They've changed the actors and the locations. So this is where Kim Jong-il was born. It's pretty well Bethlehem. Instead of a stable, there's a hut. And instead of a star above, birds were speaking Korean. There was a double rainbow, and so on. It was great to go there. Actually, in 2011, I went up there. As Kim Jong-il grew up, the two of them ruled the country. They were loved by their people, of course. Here's a North Korean monorail, and still today. Of course, on special events, people will have their photographs taken in front of images of the Kims. Kim Jong-il. So he died December 2011.
그래서 영절의 이 시간 그처럼 자유로운 노보이를 우러러 군면이 흘리는 눈물 그리도 절통하고 그 곡성 하늘에 닿는 것 아니겠습니까? 그냥 웃고만 계시는 우리의 어버이께서는 우리 조상 우리 일터에 오셨던 그날처럼 한없이 자유로운 음성으로 당부하시는 듯합니다. 온 광장에 불타는 심장들 그 간절한 당부를 새겨듣고 있습니다. 사랑하는 나의 병사들, 떨어져 살 수 없는 나의 인민들, 눈물을 가두라. 수령님을 잃은 피눈물의 언덕에서도 우리 함께 떨쳐 일어나 고난을 헤쳐오지 않았고 수령님 뜻 받들어 이 땅 위에 선금으로 존엄 높은 불패의 강국도 우리 함께 일떠세우지 않았더냐.
So that's the funeral of Kim Jong-il. His father, Kim Il-sung, died in 1994, but is still the president of the country. In fact, the younger Kims are kind of like channels of their of the originator, Kim Il-sung. Kim Jong-il, he's a bit of a ladies' man. Kim Jong-un, a bit of a ladies' man, and here's the North Korean Navy. Kim Jong-un. Actually, he's only been in power a couple of years, 3 years, 2.5 years, and he's actually, at the rate he's going to be the most bloodthirsty of all of the Kims, even though he's had a Western education. In this photograph here on the horses, these were the inner circle of power when he became the ultimate leader. In fact, every single one of them has been purged in some way, including his uncle, which is the guy on the white horse on the left who was executed last year. Everywhere you go in North Korea, you'll find images of Kims on every building. They're just everywhere to be seen. Railway stations. Older buildings just have Kim Il-sung, but since the death of Kim Jong-il, you'll find his image starting to appear on buildings as well. Even in the subway, you'll find the Kims in every single subway car. And in the countryside as well, this is kind of a socialist realism type of art, which similar to what was in the Soviet Union. Here you can see a mural which is showing a wheat field, and they usually put these mosaics in places in front of fields and on farms and so on, so the workers can imagine what it would be like if they could actually grow crops like that. Bicycles are the main transport once you leave Pyongyang. And as I said, everywhere you go in North Korea, you're going to see Kims. So you'll see these images repeated time and time again, town to town. North Korea isn't a market economy. There's no advertising. There's not what you'd really call supermarket stalls or anything like that. And so because it's not a market economy, there's no advertisements of any type. But there's certainly a lot of billboards and what appears to be advertising. What it's doing is advertising the regime. Everywhere you go for a walk in the park, there's Kim Il-sung. Let's go for another walk. Oh, there he is again. And actually, this is the large monument in Pyongyang, which is the largest of the statues, and recently added Kim Jong-il there on the right. But not being content with appearing everywhere you look, in every neighbourhood and every corner, every North Korean citizen wears images of the Kims on there above their heart. And this is a rite of passage. So when children turn around between 13 and 15, they'll be given their first pin. And then based on different stages of life and achievements, they'll receive other pins during their life. The first room you walk into inside any building is also essentially a shrine to the Kims. So any public building, and quite often kind of like commercial buildings as well, the first room will always be a shrine to the Kims. Their images appear on walls, And every room pretty well inside North Korea has these images as well. They're kind of spooky if you look carefully at the frames of the photographs. They're angled down, so the eyes follow you as you move around the room. The only rooms in North Korea that you don't see images of the Kims are bathrooms and kitchens. And so here's an example of a room that I slept in what was supposedly a typical North Korean house. Of course, it was designed for foreigners, so it was sanitized. But as you can see, I don't think you can see any Kims in that room. And when you're in towns or cities, you actually won't sleep on the floor and you'll sleep in beds, and probably most of you can't see Kims in that room either. But in fact, they are there. Every North Korean can see them, so I'll show you how this works. Just like a crucifix represents a Christian, or a Star of David for Jewish people, there's imagery like that in North Korea as well. So the purple orchid represents Kim Il-sung, and the red flower there, Kim Jong-il, represents Kim Jong-il. So if you go back into this room, you'll see that both Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il are in that room. And in fact, on my bedspread, there's Kim Jong-il. So this is kind of fascinating. A lot of people that visit North Korea on a casual basis probably don't go this deep into it, but these whole hidden messages and so on became quite fascinating to me, and so I sought them out. Okay, so travelling the country, a bit about the social engineering and so on. The country's totally closed. In fact, here's the beachside. There's electric fences. There's higher ones than this on other parts of the country. And here's the advice from my country, Australia, that says, please don't go there. And early last year, around April last year, you might remember things were quite hot and people were even predicting a nuclear war to break out. So of course that for me was a perfect time to go into North Korea. Unfortunately I got because everyone was coming out and I was going in, I received some media attention. It was at that time planned to be my last trip, so it didn't really matter that much. But as it was, I went back one other time. But what's circled in there in red is saying that I'm not worried, my dad isn't worried, my son who's in the room here, I don't think he was particularly worried, but the people at work think I'm nuts. The way to conduct yourself and to collect information and to not be to be found with the information you're smuggling out and the equipment you're smuggling in is to be useful idiot. So this is a term that was coined by the Soviets to describe people in the West that actually subscribe to their way of life and their systems and believed the propaganda and then became vehicles for the propaganda to spread outside of the country. So as I said, the South Korea and North Korea, of course there's a land border of 1,000 kilometres or so, and as I said, North Korea is only 36 kilometres north of Seoul, but you can't actually travel between the two Koreas from south to north. The easiest way, in fact the only way for Westerners really, is to come in through China. So there's three different ways you can get in. You can travel by train from Beijing. It's about a 24-hour train ride to Pyongyang from Beijing. Or you can travel in by plane, Air Koryo, which is North Korea's airline. These are great old Soviet planes. This is Pyongyang International Airport. It's really the only international airport in the whole country, or not really, it is the only international airport in the whole country for visitors, foreigners to enter by. As you can see, it's a really busy place. And you can walk into North Korea, which is what I did last time. So way up near the Russian border, you leave a city called Gyeonggi and head out, and you can walk into North Korea. And to do that, you cross the Tumen River on this bridge. And that's actually quite surreal, to walk into the country. On arriving into the country, you're met with your minders. They're called your guides, but it works on a system of good cop, bad cop. If usually there's 3 minders assigned to a group of people. If there's an American in the group, occasionally you find Americans in North Korea, there'll potentially be an extra minder added. So here's an example of the sweet, late 20s, maybe early 30-year-old female guide who's the good cop, even though she looks a tiny bit sour there. And the bad cop is standing there. As you can see, every single photograph I've got of the bad cop, he's got his fists clenched as if he's about to smash you. So he's ready for action. And then the other person is usually an elderly gentleman, my age or a tiny bit older, and he usually pretends not to speak much English, just smiles a lot, but he's actually the leader of the group. He's got an important job, and you're going to see what that is in a sec. If you come in through Pyongyang, the first place, usually you arrive late in the day and you're put on an island like Alcatraz, which is the Yangato Hotel, which is that high-rise there. It's the second largest building in North Korea. And it's separated from the city of Pyongyang by this bridge, and you're told never cross this bridge. And so Mr. Kim here, Elder Mr. Kim, one of his important jobs is to fill you with alcohol. They don't leave your side. They actually sleep on the same floor. If you're in a hotel, they sleep on the same floor. If you're sleeping somewhere else, they'll sleep in the next room. They never leave your side. They're minders. So if they fill you with alcohol and they encourage drinking, then actually you'll probably get sleepy and go to sleep. So for anyone that decides they'd like to go to North Korea, one social engineering trip is you've got to be able to give the impression that you're drinking a lot of alcohol, but don't get drunk, because all of your fun will happen at night. So we saw elevator hacking a bit earlier. Well, here's an elevator for you, but if you look carefully, there's no 5th floor. So one of the challenges in the Yangato Hotel is to get onto the 5th floor. So if you go to the staff elevators, you'll find there is a button 5th floor. And in fact, in the stairwell, which is the way that I've always got to the 5th floor, it's accessible as well. It's not accessible any longer, but I've been there 3 times. When I tried late last year, I found that the doors were well and truly sealed. The 5th floor, there's a whole lot of legend built around it, that it's a listening post where the people listen in on the rooms that are bugged and so on. Others think that it's just for the in-house television distribution and so on. But what's interesting is that the Yangato Hotel, I think from memory it's 46 or 48 stories. There's a total absence of North Korean propaganda in this whole building, except for the 5th floor, which foreigners can't go to. And on the 5th floor you'll find posters, a lot of propaganda posters. And so just 2 of them, I'll read out what they say. The one you can see here, it says, the 21st century is the age of information communications industry. And then one around the corner, which you'll see in a video in a sec, says, the bomb is a product of the Americans. Every product of Americans is our enemy. Get revenge 1,000 times against the Americans. So when you're actually in this hotel, the staff are serving you, they're smiling at you. Actually, because I'm white, they assume I'm an American. They're sweet to you. We don't have to tip there, but they act as if they'd like some. But actually, when they go to the 5th floor, which is no doubt where they go to human resources and so on, they're reminded, don't forget your mission. They're the enemy, and you're here to take advantage of that.
Mysterious 5th floor. What goes on here? Nobody knows.
So it's quite spooky. You can't really hear it in this video, but there's just a loud buzz of 60 hertz, or it's 50 hertz actually in North Korea, like AC buzzing sound. And of course, when you're in there, you're expecting to be found and detected at any time. On my first trip down, we we did get caught and were shooed off the floor. You also do at night when your minders feel you're drunk, and what was of particular interest to me is collecting intelligence transmissions. So both communications between South Korean spies that may be in North Korea and North Korean messages to North Korean spies. Both voice, so if you know anything about number stations, voice, data, Morse code and so on. This one here is a North Korean number station, so sending messages to North Korean agents. Actually, this wasn't recorded in Pyongyang, this is recorded in Dandong in China, which is a border city. So the operator is saying which agent the message is for, and then is sending a sequence of 4 sets of numbers, which actually will be used on a what they call a one-time pad, which the agent will use to decrypt the message. All night in your hotel room in the Yangato, you hear this dredging. You have to listen carefully here, but this is really, really loud when it's the middle of the night and you're trying to sleep. And this is primarily because the North Koreans built a great thing, kind of like a dam. It's called the West Sea Barrage at the mouth of the Tandong River, and as a result the river is silted up, so they dredge all night, 24 hours a day actually. At 6 o'clock the PA system through Pyongyang starts playing trance music. This actually originates from speakers at the railway station, but it echoes through the city. This recording was actually made at a hotel called the Koryo Hotel near the railway station. But you can actually hear the Yangato in the distance as well. This just plays like a kind of like a trance music. Around 7 a.m., propaganda announcements start through the PA systems. So all of this is recorded just by poking a microphone out of my hotel window. And then as workers start going to work, patriotic working music starts. And because I had an interest in radio, I was also collecting samples, quite a lot of samples, hundreds of hours of domestic North Korean radio, particularly FM radio, which most of the North Korean radio I can actually receive via satellite back in Australia. This is a satellite they're using to send it to their transmitters around the country, but FM radio I can't receive in Australia, so that was a particular interest to me to actually collect FM radio. On the FM band in Pyongyang, again, remember how close Pyongyang is to Seoul. There's the possibility that FM radio from Seoul would reach North Koreans in Pyongyang. So they take measures to avoid that happening. So this is jamming, and as you go across the band, you'll find any signal which is from South Korea is being jammed. And then you also find their own radio programs. Of course, unjammed. So most of these FM stations, you'll now find good samples on YouTube and so on. They pretty well, all of them, if not all of them, have originated from my recordings. As I just share information, so it quickly gets out there. Now, North Koreans don't know radios as we know them. Radios, usually in North Korea, don't have a tuning dial. They're simply a speaker and it's a cable radio. So North Koreans are primarily using radio as a way of distributing the signal around the country to cable head-ins. This example here is called the third network, which is a speaker on a wall. They're in every house in North Korea, in every building. And reports are that you can turn it down but not completely turn it off. It starts around 5 o'clock in the morning and finishes around 10 p.m. It's a secure network. I don't know of anyone that's ever managed to get a recording out of the country of the third network. So most secure messages for North Korean citizens are sent on that network and not through the airwaves. But because North Koreans don't have radios, and you don't expect to come across one inside North Korea, one day I was blown away when I walked into a hotel room in a new hotel, recently refurbished hotel in Hamhung, which is a city which has only just recently opened to foreigners. Because, wow, look, this is exactly what you'd see in every hotel room around the world, except not North Korea. There's a radio between the beds. Of course, I went there, turned on the radio, didn't work. But, you know, when you go around the world and you stay in hotels, quite often the radio doesn't work in hotels. So I decided, oh, okay, well, this radio's not working. This is bizarre. I've never seen a radio before in North Korea. And how would they let such a subversive type of instrument be available to foreigners? So I spent the night trying to find out why it didn't work. It's not broken. They've actually cut the transformer windings. They've removed the speaker, removed all of the cables, the audio cables. And so quite deliberately, they've disabled this radio, and yet they've kept it in the room. And this is, in my book, I go quite deeply into this, which is propaganda for visitors. This is an illusion of being connected to the outside world, an illusion of normality in a hotel room. But as you can see, that radio was never intended to work and will never work again. In fact, the following morning, I reported at the reception desk that my radio didn't work, and they assured me they'll have it, you know, thank you, we'll get it fixed for the next guest. Your mind us meet you for breakfast about 8 o'clock. And in North Korea, there's kind of zany music everywhere. So everywhere you go, you're hearing zany music like that. I'm going to move through faster. So as we go through North Korea, you meet interesting people. Simply due to the fact you're a Westerner, you get amazing access because they want to show you things. They want to show you how great their country is. Here you can see a classroom full of computers, and wow, you get to visit a high school and the computer lab. As you can see, the computers don't work. It's because there's no power to that school at the moment. But they were sitting there and actually typing on the keyboards. This I always worry about this photograph because I always think it looks like I'm a pedophile, but hello to any pedophiles here. But you get taken to endless propaganda concerts at primary school, elementary schools and kindergartens and so on. And you meet plenty of just real North Koreans who, of course, are actually trained to interact with foreigners, so very carefully chosen. You don't get the chance to meet with any real North Koreans. One thing I like doing was collecting video and kind of doing just going through, walking through buildings, shooting it to kind of give an impression of what it's actually like to be in a North Korean building. Usually I would be doing this with a camera and making it, this is a 35mm camera, and not really making it obvious that I'm filming. As I go up the stairwell, I actually move it to the side, so of my hip, so people just think I'm holding a camera and not filming. But you'll see as I come back down the stairwell, I'm not, when there's a mirror, I can't help but kind of point at the mirror. So this is a typical North Korean factory, propaganda music playing and a lot of people working. It's a very typical North Korean building. Propaganda posters are everywhere, in every town, every corner. Everywhere you'll see a billboard or an advertisement in our culture, you'll find propaganda. In fact, the buildings, you'll see signage on buildings. The signage doesn't indicate what the function of the building is. It's talking about the regime or the Kim family. So we'll usually say something like, be loyal to Comrade General Kim Jong-un or something like that. They also have targets. That last one there was, they like showing lots of bar graphs and line graphs showing how they've exceeded targets in production and so on. Hairdresser, probably the closest you would see in Pyongyang to a vegetable store, sweet potato. And one of the really landmark sites in Pyongyang is the Tower of the Juche ideas, Juche being their philosophy. They proudly tell you that it's X meters taller than the Washington Monument. You can actually go to the top of it, and in my ebook, you actually have a panoramic view and all of the landmarks marked. So that was a fair bit of research to work out where everything was and what I'm looking at. There's our hotel down there, the Yangata. And Kim Il-sung Square. This is where you see the military parades. Very much styled after the Soviet square. So this is what's marked in Kim Il-sung Square. There's markers. So when you see those mass military parades, you have to know where to stand. So this is how you know where to stand, as you can see there. So citizens of Pyongyang are the elite to live in Pyongyang. You're chosen to live there. And as you can see, they're very loyal and patriotic. Now I'm really going to speed up. I'm running out of time. This is a propaganda van, very common sight on the streets in towns.
먹는 심리 모략선으로 평화적인 건설에 만리하고 이 경제력을 끊임없이 약화시키며 우리의 진단지를 홈으로 제2의 군동등을 일으키려는 것은 이들의 변할 수 없는.
So let's leave Pyongyang. It's actually a very beautiful country. The scenery is fantastic. And of course, most of it's pristine, unspoiled. When you leave Pyongyang, your accommodation isn't as flash as Pyongyang. You're not going to find a radio between your bed, and you sleep on the floor. I love this photograph here because one of the biggest problems when you're collecting data in the country is keeping your devices charged. And this photograph, it's just a fluke. You can actually see the power strip there. The light is on saying that I've got AC power. That must have been like the only minute of the whole 24 hours that there was AC power in that room. So that was always a challenge for me, keeping my devices charged when I was out of Pyongyang. Now, North Koreans will tell you how bad the Americans are, and due to their unfair sanctions, they have no petroleum or gasoline. So they've actually converted trucks to run on burning wood. So they're not like steam trucks, they actually burn the wood, produce gas, And then they have modified combustion engines which do that. Oh, I skipped through a bit fast there, but actually most of those trucks you don't see moving. You see more of them on the side of the road with the bonnet up and smoke pouring out the back. In 2011, I was actually detained in North Korea. It was my first scouting trip, and where I was using social engineering and trying to find out how far I could push the limits. This is a place called Paektusan, Mount Paektu. The photograph where I'm standing to take this photograph is in North Korea. The far side of the lake is in China. And I was left to my own devices. The minders said to, well, you know, we're up here for about 2 hours. You're in the middle of nowhere on top of a volcano. Walk around, but don't go off the tracks. So, of course, I went off the tracks and soon found that it was like an ant's nest. There were entrances everywhere, and I saw soldiers going in and out of these entrances. I thought I was taking photographs of the entrances without being obvious and so on, but actually soon found a gun in my back and was marched down to this post here, where they yelled at me in Korean for about 10 minutes and then deleted every photograph of my camera. The reason I've got the photographs is that North Koreans, they know how to delete photographs, but they're not that tech savvy actually. What they should have done is kept the SD card, because as soon as I got back to Australia, I simply got the deleted photographs back. So when you go to North Korean farms, they proudly tell you that they can produce more food than we can in the West. In fact, at this farm, they're claiming they're receiving or producing 4 crops per year. When you pick up a piece of the dirt, there's no organic matter in there at all. It's just kind of clay. And you get very used to, well, the social engineering is, because really the methodology I used, or the method I used, was to learn a lot of North Korean propaganda and simply parrot it back to them. Because even the minders, the people that are with you, have no outside reference, it kind of like sarcasm or bullshitting someone doesn't really, they don't kind of really understand that concept, and they tend to believe what you say. So if you repeat back the propaganda they produce from their own country, they actually think that you are truly admiring their nation. And so after a while, this was on my 3rd trip, you start to, you know, after your first trip, which is kind of a scouting trip, you start to notice things aren't exactly as people say. So when you go to factories, and unlike that factory you did see machine workers making garments, usually you go to factories and nothing's happening. You can see all the machinery and you can see the end product, but you can't actually see anyone working. I went to this farm and they were very proud of this farm, but I couldn't find any farmers. And they tell you, oh, you should have come this morning, because they were quite busy preparing the fields. When you're in North Korea, you hear these type of things, just look around. There's always something to prove that what they're saying is wrong. As you can see, these wagons here look like they've never moved from when they were parked there. There's no tracks on the ground at all. And yet they had told me that earlier in the morning all of them were out in the fields. Here at the same farm are some of the probably, you know, farmers, or so-called farmers walking by. As you can see, again, the roads don't show any movement of tractors or anything like that on them particularly. This here is a fertilizer factory, the largest fertilizer factory in North Korea, which is quite close to that farm. And when I found no organic material in the ground, I thought, well, far out, like there's a large fertilizer factory nearby. I was lucky enough to visit. The reason I'm showing you this fertilizer factory is that many people just believe it is a large fertilizer factory, but it's also rumoured to be one of the largest chemical weapons production sites in the world. There's also been some people believe that chemical weapons used in Syria were sourced from this area as well, maybe this very factory. So the reason you get shown these type of things, it's kind of like in the first Iraq War, being shown a baby milk factory. In some ways, it could be a fertilizer factory, or it could be a military factory. As you can see, the imagery and the posters on the wall, usually military themes. but they're showing us that it's simply a fertilizer factory. Push bikes in North Korea have license plates, because of course that's the main mode of transport. Just really touching quickly on the gear, as I said, do some work in Australia, take devices in, really just taking in devices, hiding them, making them look like simple consumer items, an MP3 player and so on. The last 2 trips I did get a GPS in. GPSs are really forbidden. I got a GPS in on my iPhone. The last 2 trips I had my iPhone on me. They didn't actually confiscate it. And they felt that it was quite safe having an iPhone because you can't connect to the phone network easily. There's no internet, no Wi-Fi to connect to. And of course, the iPhone GPS isn't going to work without a network signal, is it? Well, how wrong can you be? All you've got to do is download the maps before you go into the country. You know exactly where you are. And I started the tracker running at the beginning every day and turned it off every night. And I've got breadcrumbs of everywhere I went through the whole country. And so correlating that to timestamps on photographs, I know exactly where every photograph I took was taken. So a lot of photographs are of transmission sites, things which they don't want you to photograph. I've got the exact coordinates of them and have been sharing those with people interested. Also, some guys were quite interested in understanding the local mobile phone network, so did some measurements of that as well. It's amazing when I do this talk, I've done this talk quite often, but when you meet these amazing people, and so one that actually, someone I'm helping right at the moment is that there's a North Korean defector in Sweden, and he's likely to be deported back to China because Sweden has decided that he's not from North Korea. He's actually a Chinese masquerading as North Korean. If he goes back to China, they'll immediately hand him back to North Korea and he'll end up in a camp. So I'm helping with this because this statue is actually in the hometown of this defector. And of course, he's got no papers to say he's North Korean. He actually was a street person. He's describing to his legal counsel his town, and I'm providing them photographs so they can correlate his story and descriptions. This is quite a remote town, and so the likelihood of him being able to describe it incredibly accurately would be quite slim unless he actually did live there. All right, now we get to the exciting part. I'm actually going to show the United States blown up by a nuclear weapon, so I'm warning you about that. I don't know if you've ever seen when Bill Clinton went in to rescue the 2 journalists a few years ago. He made sure that when he was standing next to Kim Jong-il, he never was seen as smiling in photographs, so I've used that method as well. So every photograph I have with a person with the regime, I deliberately avoid smiling. Here we are down right on the border in the DMZ, past the minefields, and there's an electric fence there. And this is looking at the front line, looking at the United Nations US outpost in South Korea from the northern side. Here's the actual electric fence and massive minefields around this. When we started, you heard about the large flag. This is what it looks like from inside North Korea. And there's tank traps down this part of the country. So this is the only road between South and North Korea, which is where the American tanks and American military vehicles would come up. They actually have wedges to be able to, with a small charge, make those cement blocks tumble down into the canyon to prevent any vehicles coming up. This is the DMZ, so you might have seen photographs of this before, but this is actually looking from North Korea into the south. And of course, the last few trips where I had an iPhone with me, I couldn't help but hide from my North Korean minders behind some pillars and send text messages to all my friends. So here's an American soldier on the other side, looking in and saying, "What the fuck are you doing?" As you can see, on the south side, there's South Korean Americans there. They take aggressive stance. They wear sunglasses. The North Koreans don't have sunglasses. And the hatred of Americans, or hatred or suspicion, I use the term hatred, but the suspicion of foreigners is bred into North Koreans at a very early age, right through the whole education system. There's a general poster on a wall which is saying don't play with landmines and so on. But one of the, using social engineering techniques, saying, oh gosh, I'm really busting and I need to go to the toilet, and if you've won the or built some relationship with your minders, sometimes they'll let you go without them following you, and then what you do is immediately go down corridors which you're not meant to go down. You can usually find the corridors you're not meant to go down because they have no lighting, they're dark. And if you go down those corridors, which is in a high school, you'll find his grandpa congratulating the kids because they've caught an American soldier. You can always pick an American because they've got a hooked nose. And here's a clueless American that's crashed his Jeep. And here's a poster saying, as students, study hard, and you can, with what you learn, you'll be able to slaughter Americans and Japanese. So this is all in a high school, down dark corridors, which isn't where my minders expected me to go. This poster was taken in Pyongyang. A minder was walking past this, and a minder pointed out to me something to the left. And when the minder points something out to you, make sure you look in every direction other than where they're pointing. What this poster says is, death to Americans and all that support them. This artwork here is, I actually have the original of, and this is what North Korean schoolgirls dream of. Phallic symbol missiles and kind of North Korean Lego they build military apparatus with. So I've actually got that original hanging in Sydney. It's fantastic. The Pueblo, most of you probably know about that. It's the only United States piece of military hardware, a ship, which is in a foreign port, an enemy port. It says the Pueblo. It's just recently been restored in Pyongyang. Yeah. Here's the signed confessions of the American crew, and also they're very keen to show off American hardware that they've caught. Now I've only got 4 minutes to go, and I'm going to show you the destruction of the USA. So this is the biggest song in North Korea last year. It still is probably the biggest song in North Korea. It's still played on North Korean radio very frequently. I actually recorded it, remixed it. You can find it on SoundCloud. I've done remixes and so on. My SoundCloud account is called Media Explorer. You'll also find lots of my Chinese work on that account as well. And here it is. So this is the official video clip to this song. At 4 minutes, 18 seconds in, you'll see North America destroyed by a nuclear weapon. What the film clip is going to show is Kim Jong-un approving the building of the missiles. Also, when they use the term satellite in North Korea, they're primarily, it's interchangeable between rocket, nuclear weapons, and so on. You'll see Kim Jong-un approving the plans, signing off on the launch happens, and then you'll see the United States destroyed. So I'm sorry to say you're all vaporized, and I think they got Australia as well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks very much. Now, this is like one of the only standing ovations we've had all weekend. Just a handful.
Download the book. It's available around October, free of charge. First place is in the iBook store.
Thank you, Mark. Now that's entertainment. Sorry we ran a few minutes late, but we didn't want to miss that.
Hey, Matt.
We'll give you a few more minutes. Sorry about that.
No worries. That was very entertaining.
Yes. We're going to hook you up. You need audio or just video?
Check, check.
Just video.
You might have to change it to 43.
Fine.
Just check your hand to widescreen.
Let's see.
Check.
Uh-oh. Good thing that was the... Yes, mine.
Check, check. Just a reminder to everybody, anybody who wants to buy the DVDs outside, we are all caught up at this point pretty much, but as the day goes on, we'll be less caught up, and we're Ram Bam, Snowden, all that stuff shouldn't be a problem. But if you want DVDs, I suggest to come early so we can take an order. Thank you.
That's fine.
All right, I think we're gonna get started. Everyone can quiet down. If there's a way to shut off the music, there we go. In the back, quiet, thank you. So thank you all. Thank you all for coming. My name is Chris Segoyan. I'm the principal technologist with the ACLU's Speech Privacy and Technology Project. Can people in the back hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, cool. So I have a fun talk, I hope, for you all today about how I learned to love cyber. So before I start, it's been a really cool year for the ACLU. I work with a team of lawyers. I advise the lawyers at the ACLU who do most of our surveillance, both national security and law enforcement litigation. And I know that for many of you, you may have heard of the ACLU, but you may not realize how we work on the issues that you probably care very deeply about. So just a couple of things we've worked on in the last few months that have really borne fruit. About a month ago, the Supreme Court ruled that cell phones are a protected space when it comes to searches incident to arrest, and so now the police need a warrant to search your cell phone. That was a big win, something we participated extensively in. We won a major decision at the 11th Circuit down in Florida, holding that location data, cellular location data, whether historical or real-time, is also protected by a warrant, and so the government cannot just simply call up the phone company and get your data. And then I'm sure many of you watched Ed Snowden's talk yesterday, and my boss Ben has been advising Ed for some time, for some months in the last year, and so that has been one of the more exciting things that we've all gotten to work on. You know, we're really, really happy how things are going so far on that particular set of issues, but Ed Snowden's revelations have really sort of opened things up in many ways on many fronts on surveillance, and you'll really get a taste of that going forward. All right, so let's go back in time. Let's go back to 2009. 5 years ago, it was a very, very different world for those of us who care about encryption, who care about surveillance, and who care about the extent to which the government can engage in massive dragnet surveillance. The world of SSL or TLS was not a good one in 2009. Of course, the technology existed within your browser. Probably you didn't have the most up-to-date version of TLS implemented in your browser, but your browser did support HTTPS, and unfortunately, most of the sites you were using, with the exception of financial sites, were probably not using it by default. And so unless you either sought out some hidden configuration option or you typed in the URL manually, most of your data was going to be going over networks without any form of encryption. This, of course, meant that both content and non-content could be monitored by the NSA. And I think if there's one thing that we've seen in the last year, it's really that massive bulk surveillance is easiest when it's performed passively, when the government can just collect and monitor unencrypted data at choke points around the world. And so back in 2009, most of the big US technology companies to whom we entrust our private data, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, Hotmail, and Yahoo, all of them sent their users' most sensitive information over the internet in plain text. We knew how to protect this information, but in 2009, these companies just were not turning on crypto by default, with the exception of the username and password during login. This is from a blog post that Google published in 2009 when they first made available an option, a configuration option to even require SSL in the future. They said HTTPS can make your mail slower, your computer has to do extra work to decrypt all that data, and encrypted data doesn't travel across the internet as efficiently as unencrypted data. That's why we leave the choice up to you. And so this is mid-2009, and this is Google's Gmail security team on one hand announcing a good thing, announcing that people don't have to manually edit the URL every time they want to go back to Gmail in the future if they want to do so securely, but on the other hand, clearly putting the responsibility on the individual user to enable this obscure option. And the option was called Use SSL, question mark. There was no label there. There was nothing suggesting that this was a security feature, nothing describing the importance of it. And it was the 13 of 13 configuration options after the vacation auto away message, after Unicode settings. I mean, it was the least important setting in the order of the interface. And so, for obvious reasons, most people probably never enabled this setting. And so, in many ways, the fact that these companies were not encrypting data meant that the NSA had a wealth of data at their disposal. If we've seen anything in the last year, if we've learned anything from the Snowden documents, it's that the biggest problem for the NSA hasn't been how to access the data, our data. It's been how to parse all the data, how to cope with data at that scale. In many ways, the NSA has really just been gorging themselves on our sensitive and private information, and this really has been made possible because so many of these large companies have done so little to protect our private information. Okay, so 2009 was a bad time, but that was 5 years ago, and things are slowly starting to get better. Over the last 3 or 4 years, and particularly in the last year, the big tech companies have really started to lock things down, and in particular to lock down the connection between your computer and theirs. Of course, this is the result of Ed Snowden. Without Snowden's disclosures to the press, we would not be having this debate. Companies would not have been forced or shamed into updating their security, and so it was the result of disclosures by Ed and then careful reporting by a few news outlets and the journalists working for them who really dug in to find things that mattered, and then I think in many ways to put direct pressure on these companies to tweak their security, or in many ways to significantly enhance their security. This slide, when it was first published by the Washington Post, the SSL added or removed here, the slide of course upset many people. Famously, several Google engineers were said to have, or wrote on their blogs, fuck those guys. Obviously, there are people inside the Google security team who don't appreciate the NSA evading the Maginot Line security systems that they designed. And so this was one example of a program by the NSA or GCHQ that definitely led to tech companies improving their security. In this case, it was Google, Twitter, and other companies deciding that finally they needed to encrypt the data center to data center links within their infrastructure. This story got a lot less press. It was also won by the Washington Post, the reporters Bart Gellman and Ashkan Soltani. And in this story, they revealed that one of the most interesting targets for the NSA were address books and buddy lists. So information about who you contact, in many cases, is even more interesting than what you're saying to them. I'm just going to sort of zoom in to the chart on the bottom right-hand side. What the Post revealed was that Yahoo and Hotmail users were having their address books collected by the NSA an order of magnitude more times than Google or Facebook. That seems like a pretty interesting data point, and of course the reason for this is that until January of this year, Yahoo wasn't using SSL at all for any of their services. So Yahoo eventually fixed things, and Microsoft has fixed things too, and Google has not only continued with their moves towards SSL, but they've enabled perfect forward secrecy, they've tweaked the algorithms they're using, and so in many ways the upgrades we've seen have really been as a result of this news coverage. In March of this year, or sorry, May of this year, a bunch of operators of Jabber servers or XMPP servers all got together and said, you know what, it's 2014, we should be requiring encryption by default for the transit links between our users and servers. And so they all turned it on. And that was a really big thing, because now the government, our government, or in fact any other government, cannot just sit on the wire and watch instant message traffic go back and forth. And so we're really seeing this trend towards encrypting data in transit and towards encrypting data between the consumer and the server. This has really been helped by some of the Snowden stuff, but there have also been other efforts. Naming and shaming can work particularly well when the practice that the company is engaged in is largely indefensible but not known to the general public. A few months ago, Google published this really useful transparency report revealing which of the servers they interact with, the mail servers they interact with, and which of those support Start TLS server-to-server email encryption and which of those don't. And the changes that have happened in just the last month or two since Google made this data available have really been night and day, because now we can name the companies who haven't turned on this basic option. And so just in the last month or so, Comcast, Apple, Microsoft Outlook, Craigslist have all turned on TLS for their mail server to mail server connections. And they probably wouldn't have done this had Google not made this data set available. So this, again, has been really powerful. It's probably not really that much of a point to encrypt the connection between your computer and Google if Google's then going to send your emails plain text between Google and Yahoo or Google and Hotmail. And so naming and shaming has also been quite effective. I know that gamification is a pretty silly concept and is rightfully mocked by many people in the tech community, but it works. And one of the most interesting and useful examples here is the SSL Labs project by Qualys, where they give letter grades to server operators based on their SSL configuration. Are they using TLS 1.3? Are they using perfect forward secrecy? Are they protected against particular attacks? Do they have the right configuration options enabled? And I've seen server operators continually tweaking their configuration until they get that A grade, or even better, the A+ grade. This works. It doesn't cost any money to run this test, and if you administer a server or you work in an organization and you have contact to your IT department, I highly encourage you to go and check your own site against the SSL Labs test bed and see what your own letter grade is, and if you're not getting an A+, like my organization currently does not have, I encourage you to talk nicely to your IT department and offer them nice things until they agree to finally get you that A+ score. So when the Prism slide was first made public and Google's logo was up there, Apple's logo, Microsoft's logo was up there, these companies were in an NSA slide deck essentially describing how they had been forced to collude with the government and surveil their customers. That looked really bad for those companies, and particularly when it came to their foreign markets, and particularly in Europe. We've seen these companies first deny and then say, we're in a tough situation, and then decide that they're going to start talking about surveillance. And they're in many ways talking about how they're making surveillance more difficult, and they will push back against requests, and they're going to fight where they can and file requests at the FISA court. But this is in many ways the exception rather than the norm. Typically, you won't find companies that want to talk about surveillance. You won't find companies that are going to talk about how they're making surveillance more difficult. You're definitely not going to see government officials, for the most part, talking about why surveillance is a bad thing. Even when we have progressive members of Congress who are on our side, at best we can hope that they will ask for a warrant. At best we can ask that they will hope for some kind of oversight. But it's very, very rare that you'll find a politician who will grandstand and say that there should be data that should be always off limits to law enforcement or always off limits to the intelligence community. It's very rare that you'll find a member of Congress who will say, you need to deploy this technology because the NSA should never get it. That will probably never happen. But there are many technologies that this community wants companies to deploy that in fact won't just raise the bar a little bit, but in fact raise the bar so high that data will in many cases be completely off limits to the state. And so if we want these technologies to be deployed, if we want Google to turn this on, end-to-end encryption on by default, or we want Dropbox to finally start using per-user keys that are not known to the company, then an anti-surveillance message is probably not going to be the thing that gets the company to do that. And we're definitely not going to get members of Congress to harass these companies to deploy technologies that will blind the NSA. And so for that reason, we need a different message. We need to be comfortable with spin, and we need to be comfortable using a message that for far too long we've left to our opponents. So this is Pamela Jones-Harbor, a former commissioner with the Federal Trade Commission. She was probably one of the leading voices of privacy when she was at the Commission until, I think, 2010 when she left. This is a speech she gave, her last public speech, March of 2010. Today, I challenge all of the companies that are not yet using SSL by default. That includes email providers, social networking sites, and any website that transmits consumer data. Step up and protect consumers. Don't just do it some of the time. Make your websites secure by default. So I've looked really hard, and I think this is the first time any senior presidentially appointed US government official even uttered the words SSL, let alone called for SSL by default. This was a very, very progressive speech from an agency that doesn't typically use its soapbox that hadn't previously used its soapbox to advocate for these kind of sweeping technical rollouts. Similar, Charles Schumer, the senator from New York, one of two senators from New York, a tough law and order senator. Just a few years ago, Schumer proposed a mandatory SIM card registration law because of the threat posed by anonymous burner phones. Schumer is about as tough on crime as they get, but just in 2011, Schumer wrote letters to Yahoo, Twitter, and Amazon calling on them to turn on SSL by default. He said, quote, "Providers of major websites have a responsibility to protect individuals who use their sites and submit private information. It's my hope that the major sites will immediately put in place secure HTTPS web addresses." So on one hand, you have these two government officials, senior government officials, calling on companies to deploy technology that'll actually make bulk surveillance more difficult. Well, how does that happen? How do we get these people, these very powerful public officials, to use their soapbox to push for the technologies that we want companies to deploy? Well, it turns out the threat that they were worried about was hackers. They weren't worried about the NSA, right? They weren't talking about the NSA. If you look in the full text of Commissioner Harber's speech or Chuck Schumer, they were not talking about the Iranian government or the Chinese government. They were talking about hackers at Starbucks. They were talking about the widespread availability of tools that allow people to steal authentication cookies from open Wi-Fi networks and then log into each other's accounts. And in many ways, the thing that made this a front page issue was the availability of this tool Firesheep, written by a security researcher named Eric Butler. And it was about 2 or 3 weeks after the New York Times wrote about Firesheep in 2011 that Chuck Schumer gave this speech on a Sunday afternoon and sent these letters out to a tech company. It was the threat of identity theft and petty crime, stalking, that led to these senior government officials calling for technology that we want companies to use. But technology that for the last year we have described as an anti-NSA technology. Now, we will never get Chuck Schumer to give a speech calling on tech companies to make things more difficult for the NSA. But we can get Chuck Schumer to give more speeches calling for technologies that make life more difficult for stalkers, for domestic abusers, for criminals, for petty thieves. And if those technologies happen to make life more difficult for the NSA, well, that's okay. But we cannot expect these politicians to call for technical controls that actually thwart the NSA's surveillance dragnet. In 2009, I wrote a public letter to Eric Schmidt, then the CEO of Google. The letter was co-signed by Bruce Schneier, by Ron Rivest, the R in RSA, 37 security experts. We all wrote to Google and we said, you need to turn on SSL by default. This was about 6 months before Google eventually did it. And in that letter, again, we didn't use any language about the NSA, even though, of course, many of us were thinking about the NSA. We used the language of identity theft and fraud and crime. We said, we strongly urge you to follow the lead of the financial industry and enable HTTPS by default. Given the huge threat posed by identity theft, it is vital that Google take proactive steps to protect its users from these risks. So Google did eventually, actually relatively recently after that letter, turn on SSL. And when they did it, they did it the same day that they announced they'd been hacked by the Chinese government. And we can have a discussion about whether that was a very cynical move by Google and they were trying to show that they were doing something to stop the Chinese. But what's important to understand, again, is that when Google announced that they were turning this on, there was nothing in their marketing material, nothing in their blog post about the NSA or the FBI or law enforcement or deep packet inspection by ISPs. It was timed with the announcement of the China hack. And so by framing things in the context of threats that US government officials are worried about, we can make it much easier for companies to do the right thing in a way that we like. Okay, so in addition to that, we should remember we have agencies at the federal level that are there to protect our privacy and our security online. The US doesn't have a system as robust as Europe, where you have, in many European countries and in Canada, you have a single privacy commissioner who on one day is giving a speech about Facebook, and the next day is giving a speech about the intelligence community violating people's privacy rights. We don't have that in the United States. The two sort of biggest agencies we have are the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Communications Commission. And the FTC's mandate doesn't extend to surveillance. It doesn't extend to the activities of government agencies. It extends to activities by companies. The FTC goes after Facebook for lying to you about how they protect your privacy. They go after, TJ Maxx for losing credit card numbers. And so if we want the FTC to do things on our behalf, we need to sugarcoat it in a way that makes it palatable to them and allows them to make statements without making it seem like they are overstepping their authority. By the same token, the Federal Communications Commission, they aid the surveillance state. They were the ones that were required by Congress to implement CALEA, a wiretapping law. They forced the carriers to build wiretapping features into their networks. And so if we make it difficult for them by asking them to do anti-surveillance actions, we're going to hit a brick wall. So we need to frame things in a way that are palatable to the two agencies that are most equipped and have the most power to do things to force companies to protect all of our data. Okay, so that brings me to cyber. I know that this term has a lot of baggage in this community. I know that for many people, cyber means a potentially embarrassing online conversation with someone whose gender and age may not actually be what they told you. And I know that there's this message in the community that people who say cyber and use it to mean internet security are idiots. Right? We have this idea that real experts talk about information security and idiots in DC talk about cyber. In the same way that we would like the word hacker to mean people who tinker, people who experiment, people who push boundaries in technology, not criminals. But that ship sailed a while ago. There is a cyber industry in DC, and they don't care about the fact that you think the word cyber is stupid. You may think that cyber means age, sex, location, but for the people that matter, cyber means a massive threat, a threat that they don't understand, and a threat that requires massive resources, legislation, power, and compromise of core values. And we cannot change their minds. We can have that fight. We can stand there and try and convince them that cyber is a stupid word, or we can focus on the actual core problem. Thank you for that one person who's a realist. So many of you may, of course, know James Clapper, who famously lied before Congress when describing what the NSA wasn't doing. Clapper gave a speech before Congress just a couple years ago, 2013, last year. He said, "When it comes to the distinct threat areas, our annual Intelligence Community Worldwide Threat Assessment this year leads with cyber, and it's hard to overemphasize its significance. In previous years, terrorism had been the #1 threat that DNI identified as a threat to this country. In 2013, cyber was the #1 threat that DNI identified." Again, we can have a debate about whether they know what they're talking about. We can have a debate about this word, but they've already put it at the front of the agenda. He added, "These cyber threats put all sectors of our country at risk, from government and private networks to critical infrastructures." So when you have the top intelligence official in the country going before Congress and saying that this cyber thing is a massive threat, members take note. When you have large defense contractors taking out subway advertisements in DC, talking about 0 days. The congressional staffers who ride the subway to work, they take note. Right? And so, again, we can sit here and say, from our ivory tower and say, they don't know what they're talking about, they're not even using the right words. But members of Congress on a daily basis are hearing from people that they trust, people who have legitimate sounding resumes, who've worked in the government themselves. They're hearing from them that cyber is a massive threat and that they need to do something about it. Now, this is, of course, is Keith Alexander, until recently the director of the NSA. Those of us who are cynical, I think many people in this room are probably quite cynical, particularly after the last year. Those of us who are cynical might say, well, they're just hyping the cyber threat because they want to make lots of money. Keith Alexander famously, as soon as he left the government, started talking to financial firms and offering them cybersecurity consulting advice for $1 million a month. And so we could say, look, these defense contractors, they want to get rich. Cybersecurity is the only part of the defense budget that's going up right now. These guys see an opportunity to make some money, and they're ginning up the threat. Right? They just want to make money, and the way they do that is by spreading fear, by going to Congress and saying that the sky is falling, that we're under attack. Well, so what? Every day, a lobbyist is going to a member of Congress or a congressional staffer and telling them that there's a cybersecurity threat, that this is the biggest threat our country faces. Every day, congressional staff and members of Congress open up the newspaper and read stories about massive data breaches in which hundreds of millions of credit card numbers are stolen, confidential intellectual property, trade secrets, stuff is walking out the door. And if the response from our community, whether the technical side of the community or the civil liberties community, is to say that there is no cyber threat or that the cyber threat is overhyped, we won't be taken seriously. Because the fact is, there is a cyber threat. We just don't like the terminology that they're using, and we question their motives. And so in many ways, this cyber stuff is like a train. It's a train that's moving really, really fast, and there's a lot of weight behind it. And if we try and stand in front of it, we're going to get squished. But the thing is, we can sort of direct the direction of the train. And the reason for this is the people who are getting the briefing. This is Ted Stevens, the now deceased senator, and Ted Stevens very famously gave a speech in which he called the internet a series of tubes and instantly became a global laughingstock. Now, I live in Washington, and I go to Congress on occasion, and I talk to staffers. And my guess as to what happened is that someone came in to give Ted Stevens a briefing, and they described the internet as a series of pipes. And then an hour later, when he was talking to someone else, or giving that speech, it sort of got flipped in his brain. And you can sort of see the connection between pipes and tubes. It's pretty close. And for a non-technologist, for a non-tech expert, grasping that concept is pretty impressive. And so here's how it works. You have these lobbyists, many of whom are former military or government officials who know nothing about technology, and they're now working for defense contractors. And they're going to Congress every day, they're going to the executive branch every day and talking about this cyber threat. And the people they're talking to are congressional staffers, most of whom are 25 years old with a political science degree, or members of Congress who don't have any technical background, and they're talking about the cyber threat. And so you have two people having a conversation, neither of whom actually understand the technology. And so what that means then is that a successful lobbying pitch by an ex-general now working for Booz Allen or Raytheon or Lockheed is merely to leave the member with the impression that the cyber threat is big and that maybe their company's tools and solutions are what they need to buy or what we need to give money to. But they never get into the weeds. And so this is an opportunity for us. If we try and convince Congress that the cyber threat is not real, we will lose. If we say that the cyber threat is real and the solutions that we want can solve the cyber threat, then we win. Right? There are many, many, many technologies that we would like that would in fact make it more difficult to steal credit card numbers, that would in fact make it more difficult for the Chinese government to steal proprietary information. But those technologies would also have the side effect of protecting our civil liberties and protecting our information from massive bulk dragnet surveillance. And so for far too long in Congress, there's been this decision that policymakers have been stuck with. They weigh, on one hand, civil liberties, and on the other hand, they weigh national security and public safety. They're told, you know, okay, we're going to allow wiretapping without a warrant, but on the other hand, we can stop this ticking bomb. And so all you need to do is just pass this legislation that gives these good people the authority to do what they need to do to keep us safe. And it's really difficult to go in and talk to a policymaker and tell them that that's a bad idea, because if there's another attack and they didn't sign on to that legislation, they're going to lose their next election. But if we tell them that these solutions that are being proposed by the FBI, the solutions that are being proposed by the NSA, would in fact make our network less secure, that would in fact make our network more vulnerable to attack, that retaining data is a target. The data retained for the intelligence community becomes an instant target for hackers. If we tell them that, then suddenly it becomes a debate of security versus security. Security from the local criminal against security from the cyber threat. And then suddenly the member is stuck, because they know they want to keep this country safe, but they don't really know which threat is more serious. And that's a much better position to be arguing from than this sort of moral high ground of civil liberties that you know are going to be thrown under the bus the next time there's a terrorist attack. So for years, Bruce Schneier and others have been talking about the 4 horsemen of the information apocalypse. I'm sure some of you have heard of this. These are, of course, our drug dealers, terrorists, pedophiles, and kidnappers. But there's a new horseman in this club that isn't yet in the picture, and his name is Ugly Gorilla. So the Chinese government has been demonized in Washington to the point that they are just as bad as terrorists and drug dealers and pedophiles. US companies are bullied into not buying equipment from Huawei or ZTE because of this threat. The US government risks upsetting trade relations with the Chinese governments in order to send a message about how upset it is about the cyber actions of the Chinese army. And so usually, the people in the civil liberties community, the people that I work with, we are on the receiving end of the 4 horsemen, right? So we are arguing in court about the importance of the 4th Amendment and why the government should get a warrant. And on the government side, they're talking about how if the government has to get a warrant, this sexual predator might not get charged, or we might not stop the next terrorist attack. And so usually, those of us who care about civil liberties are defending ourselves from attacks, from accusations that we will aid the 4 horsemen, that we will aid the bad guys. This cyber thing actually gives us an opportunity to use one of the 4 horsemen, or now the 5 horsemen, for our side. Right? The things that the intelligence community wants actually make us more vulnerable. They make our systems weaker. They make our security worse. And that gives us a position of moral authority and technical authority from which we can really defend a lot more of what we care about. Okay, so what this means then, Tor is not an anonymizing service that hides you from the NSA. Tor is a cybersecurity technology that protects US private information from foreign threats. Silent Circle and Red Phone, the 2 technologies that use the ZRTP protocol. These are not secure technologies that blind the NSA or wiretapping-proof technologies that keep the FBI out. They are cybersecurity technologies that stop foreign governments from stealing US secrets. The Whisper Systems Text Secure app, which I hope all of you are using because it's finally the first easy-to-use encrypted instant messaging solution that I can actually get my family members to use. This is not a tool for terrorists or criminals. This is a cybersecurity solution, and we should all be pushing cybersecurity solutions. All right, so repeat after me. Cyber, cyber, cyber. All right, you don't have to actually. But really, you get the idea, right? In the same way that Giuliani is 9/11, 9/11, 9/11, we should be cyber, cyber, cyber. To anything that we don't like that promotes more surveillance, the answer should be cyber. Because everything that the NSA has proposed to date on the Hill in Washington, D.C., whether it's information sharing, whether it's data retention, whether it's wiretapping backdoors in communication networks, they're all bad for cybersecurity. But we haven't been pushing this message hard enough. And so we really need to go on the attack. The entire technical community, the civil liberties community, we need to develop an affirmative cybersecurity agenda. And what I mean by that is if you ask the public interest groups, if you ask technical organizations what they would like on privacy, they have a list of things. We want to pass legislation to require a warrant for email access. We want to require that the government post transparency reports. So we have a list of things. If you ask them what we would like on IP or on patents or on so many issues, we have a wish list of legislation of affirmative changes. But to date, if you ask us what we want on cybersecurity, it's please don't pass CISPA. We don't like the legislation that the NSA has proposed, and our community has done a really bad job to date of pushing back and calling for things that will actually improve cybersecurity. And so the problem with this is that if every day or every week you go up to Congress and you say, we don't like what you've proposed, and every week there's a new data breach, eventually you get ignored. Eventually they dismiss your concerns and they say the threats are too important, we need to do something. But if we go there every week and we say, here's a problem and you're not fixing it and you're making systems less secure, then we at least bring something to the table. Then we have a place, a legitimate place at the table. And so there are things that we should be calling on that are so obvious, that are so indefensible, that we can really put the government on the defensive. So for example, 10% of US government computers apparently are still running Windows XP. This is laughable, and this would actually lead to a significant and real improvement in cybersecurity. It's of course impossible to protect a 15-year-old operating system from attacks, a 15-year-old operating system that hasn't been hardened, that doesn't have any new defenses. This is something that we are slowly adopting at the ACLU. It's taking a little bit of time because as a civil liberties group, we've never thought about things in this way. And my position didn't even exist until 2 years ago. So we now have two full-time technologists who are working on issues like this. And so last year, we filed a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission, and we said that it was disgraceful that consumers are not getting regular security updates for their Android devices. People shouldn't have to wait 6 months or a year for a security fix, and if the carriers don't want to give people updates, they should get out of the way or let people out of their contracts so that they can get a secure device. And you may not agree about this particular approach or this particular issue, but what's important is that we're now pushing an agenda. We have a list of things that we want the government to fix that will make us more secure, and that more importantly won't violate our civil liberties or require that we give up any of our privacy. And so cyber is this huge opportunity for us because all the technical knowledge is on our side. Right? We understand this stuff way more than the folks on the Hill and the Intelligence Committee in the White House. There just aren't many technologists in the government. And so we really have this position of technical authority from which to push back and to tear apart all of their proposed cyber solutions. We haven't been doing this to date, and I really think this isn't something, pardon me, that the civil liberties community can do by itself. We need the input of the security community. We need the input of the hacker community because you all are far closer to where the action is, and you have ideas for really things that will make a big difference while also not requiring major investments of resources or requiring that the government do significant things that they probably cannot do. So thank you very much for your time. I think I have about 5 or 10 minutes for questions, and there's an ACLU table outside. So I don't know how the mic thing works here. Is there a mic? There's a mic over there. I can't see anything. So if you want to ask any questions or rant for preferably no longer than 20 seconds, please come up to the mic. Otherwise, you can find my contact information online, and we are always looking for suggestions for things that we should be working on that are sane.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Mike?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
There used to be an Office of Technology Assessment to advise Congress. Do you think that it's worth, I think it's been gone for a while, do you think it's worth a community effort to try and advocate for its reinstatement?
So what she's saying, there used to be an Office of Science and Technology or something along those lines in Congress that provided non-biased technical advice to members of Congress, nonpartisan, non-biased advice. And when Newt Gingrich came into Congress, he shut it down because he said it was a waste of money. So what it essentially means is that there are very, very few to no technical experts working in Congress. Most of the people there have political science degrees. They are not technically skilled. I think it would be a great idea if Congress hired technologists. I was the first technologist that the Federal Trade Commission ever hired, and then they hired several more, including some of my friends, and then they appointed a chief technologist, which is now a senior computer scientist on rotation through the agency. I think the more technical experts we get in DC, the better. It's always a good idea if you can have people who know what they're doing advising policymakers, so that way when a lobbyist comes to them and says, this great idea will fix everything, they can say, well, actually, it's not that good of an idea after all, and it'll break the internet. Yes, ma'am.
Chris, great presentation. Thank you so much. Isn't this really about protecting American intellectual property? And isn't that another thing that can help unite people, that we need to strengthen the security systems across the board?
I'm not going to walk down the road of IP laws. I suspect that my opinions are probably not the same as many folks in Congress on IP issues. But I will say that given that we have a multi-billion-dollar industry complaining about IP theft, if we can say that security technologies will protect IP from being stolen, let's go with that and use them to our advantage.
So yay for 3 women asking questions right off the bat. But no, my question was, I think, well, it's not really a question. I just think that it's good to have messaging, and so I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate then supporting tools. But I feel like there's a missing piece, and we have to go further, because, you know, using tools and protecting ourselves, you know, citizenry of countries who are engaging in, you know, cyber warfare against one another, which is actually what's going on. I mean, it doesn't really protect us doesn't really protect against DDoSing or, you know, pretty high-level espionage or the 0 days. Like, so these are problems that are going to always exist, and they're only escalating at this point. So I think just beyond saying, you know, making a case for, you know, using, making the internet infrastructure and end-user tools more secure, we also have to be talking about including civil society voices in policymaking in a multi-stakeholder model, which is what internet governance is, but it's definitely not, you know, that's not how things are done in military and or law enforcement, right? So I just want to say that I think it's a good starting point, and to think more long-term as well about how the sort of larger and maybe more root problems can be solved.
So I will agree and acknowledge that there's this strange disconnect between the problems that are identified by members of Congress and the solutions that they propose. So you will have in the same statement a member of Congress talk about identity theft and stolen credit cards, and then talk about how their bill is really important to cybersecurity, but the information sharing legislation they're proposing, which essentially allows companies to share information with each other or with the government without fear of lawsuits, privacy lawsuits, that won't really do much to stop someone from breaking into your computer and taking your information. And so we do have policymakers sort of calling out identity theft as this threat, a threat they say that they care about, but then nothing that they're proposing really addresses that. And so that gives us an opportunity to say, well, hang on, we have solutions to this identity theft problem. We have solutions to this issue of 50 million credit card databases getting stolen, or databases with credit card information getting stolen. All right, my time is up. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
doesn't work, I can display off. It's not picking up the external display. This is only changing my native screen. I think that's gonna work. Wait, it's doing this. Sorry, so you don't need that. Okay. Let me. That's all I need. I just want to get this all up. It's not seeing it. I have yet to see the problem on this laptop. There's always a first time. Do you have another? Oh, let's try that one back before you go trying there. And then if it doesn't work, I can use another laptop to display. If you've got one lying around.
Mine's upstairs because I'm ready to strike stuff. It's no, it's.
Try 10.4. It's just not seeing the external monitor. So
Yeah, it might not have the drivers for it. Did you test it before or no?
I've displayed lots of stuff on this. I haven't tested it yet.
It's tap clicking out.
That was bad. I don't know if I can recover from it. I'll try. The problem is I can't get that other window. So the problem is that this is just
no,
like...
it's a tech display. See if it'll...
Usually it just finds it. So if any other laptop I can display off. I have a PDF of myself.
Going through a jump here.
Let's pull the jump out.
Yeah, well, you do knock your display, you do knock your resolution back. Alright. Does this thing have HDMI out? It does. Hold on, let's go get an HDMI.
I've never seen that work, but it might. Let's try it.
Well, the good news is the pressure's off.
Alright, good. I can display off anyone's laptop if anyone has a laptop. Maybe I should ask Chris if he's willing to launch his laptop. I don't think it's going to work because...
Well, if the hack we can...
Let me try a different window manager.
It's really not going to work, but...
What I think we should do is focus on finding another laptop. Because I can, if you have a laptop, if you have any laptop with virtual live.
Oh. No, well, we're going to try.
have it? Did that work for people?
Looks good.
Looks good.
I don't know if you're mirroring.
Let me see whether I can figure out the stuff I need.
No, this is fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do... The actual
Hey, all right. Quick announcement, intro, and then it's all yours.
All right.
Thanks. Welcome. All right, you maniacs. Where are we at? Holy cow. Getting towards the end. I don't know if there are any other marathon runners in here. I feel like we just did one. So we're getting towards the end. This is the last talk in sort of the regular program. We have some closing ceremonies happening in here. I believe, I believe that we'll have the Olson room in the back simulcast with the partitions open for the closing ceremonies because a lot of people are still here. So stick around for that. Stick around to clean up a little bit. If you can't stick around to clean up a little bit, clean up a very small little bit and take your own personal trash and send it in the back. That way someone else doesn't have to do that. So without further ado, this is Peter Eckersley with Privacy Friendly Hypertext.
Hello, Hope. Hello, New York. Thank you for staying for what I think is the last non-closing ceremony talk of the conference. I've had an awesome weekend. I hope you guys have too. I am here to talk about an EFF project that is dealing with a different kind of surveillance from the kind we've been talking about a lot this weekend. Of course, EFF works on government surveillance, defending against wiretapping. But today, I'm here to talk about the actual designed nature of the web and hypertext, the fact that it's spying on us all of the time, and that it's time to do something about that. So we have this project that we launched in alpha a few months ago. Actually, tomorrow morning we're going to be going beta, so you guys get a preview of the new cool features and stuff that we're doing tomorrow. In this little program called Privacy Badger. I want you all to remember that URL. It's really easy to remember. You can install this thing during the talk, after the talk. Probably not during the talk because you'll get distracted and you'll tell me about the bugs in the software and I don't want to know about them until afterwards. You can file that stuff on GitHub. But, you know, I'm not just talking about Privacy Badger and this piece of software. I'm actually telling a story, I think, about the architecture of the web and the architecture of hypertext and the way that privacy does or doesn't fit into that. So if you go back to the days before the web, we enjoyed a thing that we often took for granted, which was the right to read in private. You could walk into a library and walk between the stacks and pull out a book and start reading it. And unless there was someone cute further up the aisle looking at you, watching what you were doing, for the most part, no one would know what you chose to read. You could walk into a bookstore and purchase a book in cash, and other than the person at the checkout counter who didn't know who you were anyway, you could take that book home, put it under your bed, and no one would know that you were reading about whatever it was, anarchism or Islam, or secretly you were conservative and you didn't want anyone to know that. Today, that right is gone. If you choose to read anything using the modern medium of reading that we've invented, the web, the chances are 1, 2, 3, half a dozen other parties and companies are going to end up knowing what it was that you were reading. We can indeed still go to the library, except by doing so, you're accepting a significant amount of inconvenience compared to what we now have as our best way of reading. So yes, you can, for the time being, until they close, let's try and keep them open, you still have those physical libraries. But we've just lived through something that was actually the equivalent of the Gutenberg invention of the printing press in terms of the degree of transformation and awesome improvement of writing in terms of the way it works, but we didn't bring privacy with us. Anyway, throughout this slide deck, I'm going to have some pictures of badgers because I can't help it. And we have the sad badger because we've lost the right to privacy. And we've built this new medium, the World Wide Web. It's an amazing achievement. But along the way, we failed to build it with privacy in the design. And so the web has these creepy eyes that are spying on us. And anytime you get too sad, just think about cute badgers and we'll stay cheerful and we'll make it through. But if you look inside the design of the modern web, this privacy problem is woven in really deeply. Do you want to have basic hypertext functionality? Do you want hyperlinks? Do you want embedding? Well, you just also built referrer, post, and get tracking. The pages you're looking at just disclose to other web servers the fact that you were looking at the source page when you embedded an image. And of course, we don't just use the web for hypertext. We use it for user interfaces. So do you want a stateful user interface that remembers what buttons you clicked and actions you took a moment ago? Well, you need cookies or some other state tracking mechanism. And those turn out to also be the index identifiers that are used in these giant databases of our reading habits and online activities. So the awesome functionality we wanted is completely entangled with the design of a surveillance system. Do you want offline web apps? And modern browsers support all sorts of nifty features for this, like little databases that they'll store for an application with its records and state. Now you have super cookies, so even though you thought you blocked your cookies, there's this other thing that can be used to store identifiers and send them back to sites so they know who you are. And okay, so we have these problems, and what does it mean in practice? It means there are a lot of people who end up knowing what you read. Some of them know because, in a more fundamental sense, they are the platform on which you are reading. They are the first parties in your address bar, whether that's at Google or Facebook or Amazon. People do so much through those companies that they just get to see a giant window into your life. It's people who've kind of surreptitiously snuck onto your computer. You've installed some app, some browser toolbar or something. Here are a bunch of these examples. They're really deceptive sometimes. You end up with this thing on your computer, probably not people in this room, but your relatives, when you go to help them with their buggy computers, you'll find them full of this stuff, and it's tracking them. And then these guys, the third parties on the web, are the ones who really take advantage of those properties of hypertext I was talking about before, where they've woven themselves into the page, and just by loading it and all of its sub-resources, you end up telling them what you're doing all of the time. So this is the situation, and I'm going to focus in this talk on these kinds of trackers. So I want everyone, along the way, let's just try and keep a vision of what we want here. We want the beautiful infinite library of the web, the infinite library of hypertext. I just really enjoy looking at pictures of beautiful old libraries, actually. So here's another one. And of course, the one we have on the web, or the one we aspire to having, also has a lot of cute pictures of animals on it. They occupy a prominent adulted place there. But how is this beautiful thing funded? How is it built? It's built around all sorts of ghastly things we don't want to know about, like deceptive ads for antivirus software that they're actually malware themselves. Going to search for Firefox, and what you find at the top is an ad for the Yahoo version of Firefox that probably comes bundled with some kind of toolbar that you'd rather not know the details of. All of these weird ads that maybe some of us don't see if you run an ad blocker. But a lot of humanity, the vast majority of humanity, is seeing this stuff, clicking on it, and this is the underbelly that's paying for a large fraction of the current web. And probably in our beautiful infinite library, we'd rather it was funded by something more principled. So how did we get into this mess? I don't think anyone exactly knows the answer. Collectively, when our species stumbles into a mess, it's usually the product of many forces. But a couple of interesting processes that I want to call out. One is these bad guys, who you're probably all familiar with. The RIAA and the MPAA and their crazy jihad against the internet in the name of copyright law has actually been, I think, hugely destructive for the way the web got built. And the subtle thing here is these guys look like bad guys to us. But if you're a policymaker, if you're a member of the establishment, they're a respected industry that's been around for a long time and has a legitimate claim to representing, or semi-legitimate claim at least, to representing creative people, authors, artists, musicians, who need to get paid for their work. And these industries have managed to kind of seize all of the mind share around the idea that we have social institutions that are there to pay authors. And that institution, or those institutions are all copyright and its handmaidens. It's DRM, collecting societies, all of this infrastructure that we know, everyone here knows, is hopelessly broken. We can't pay artists and authors in the future using DRM and copyright, and the idea that you could is absurd. And yet, this bunch of industries has hijacked any conversation about what we might do instead if we were to set out to design good institutions for paying authors. So this is one problem that we've faced politically. The other problem is that people on our side, I think ultimately, technologically and politically, looked around at their options, smart people in Silicon Valley, and said, well, there is one way we could make the web that we want to work, the free web. Let's just make everything work beautifully and elegantly and make it free, and then there'll just be a small price, a small percentage price in your privacy, so that we can show you ads that'll be very well targeted, and we can build a beautiful version of the web. And I think that's worked for Google itself, for Twitter itself, for some of those companies, but what it hasn't worked for very well is the web as a whole. And in particular, it's meant that the web as a whole is this tracking mechanism, and we're in this situation where we don't want to live with that privacy invasive web. We do want to fund it, we do want good institutions, but we don't want the exact version we're living with. So how do we get out of this mess? And I think there are many ways that hackers should be thinking about to fix this. And some people are already proposing creative business models, like I think the rise of Kickstarter is a great thing for the web. I think the rise of Flatter and other payment methods that you can use to send a little payment to the site you're on is a great development. I think people are talking about ideas like variants of Bitcoin that pay the sites you enjoy reading just automatically when you visit them. All of these directions for innovation should be pursued. But the one I'm going to talk about today is the simplest, and that is to say, look, we're not going to get rid of the advertising-funded web. It's big and it's producing good things as well as privacy invasion. Let's just make it suck less. Let's figure out a way to have online advertising that isn't quite as demonic as what we've had so far. The strategy is build privacy tools that everyone, not just people in this room who know how to use NoScript or whatever, everyone can use them 24/7. They just get installed once and work nicely. They reintroduce the concept of consent. So instead of just browsing around the web and 12 companies get your reading habits or 100 companies get your reading habits, if the price of using Facebook or some other site is that you have no privacy on that site, that's a clear negotiation with the user, and they can make a choice about whether that's a price they're willing to pay. This is sort of the rhetoric of the advertising industry today, but it's fiction. No one actually consents to third-party tracking. Let's reintroduce real consent, informed consent. Let's find the best practices that some of the less evil advertising companies have out there and make those the minimum flaw for the web, and encourage a marketplace where advertising companies actually compete to do better than that. And there are incentives which currently don't exist. You wouldn't know the difference between an ad showed to you by a creepy tracking company and one that respects your privacy. Let's make that actually happen. So we're going to do this with this browser extension called Privacy Badger. It's going to go out there and find those hypertext cookies and do something about them. It's going to find the super cookies and track them down and get rid of them, and implement this strategic vision. So along the way, why is writing privacy software hard? Why doesn't this already exist? And a large part of the answer is arms races. We've been telling people as technologists, oh, do something about cookies or do something about this tracking mechanism for decades, actually. And people out there actually hear this slowly. They hear, oh, yeah, I should clear my cookies, and they start doing that. But when you've got an arms race between individuals trying to reconfigure their browsers manually or using one or two of the traditional extensions, and the bad guys who are doing whatever it takes with large engineering teams to track you, the bad guys are going to win. We actually did a measurement of one of the mechanisms the bad guys were using in this Panopticlick project, which you might have come across. This is a little site, it's still live, that measures the fingerprintability of your browser. The data on the site is a little bit old, but what we found in our initial tests of about 1 million browsers in the course of a couple of weeks was that around 90% of the desktop browsers in that sample could be uniquely identified out of a sample of 1 million just from the configuration and settings information you could read from a web page. So, make a few JavaScript calls to say, what's the screen resolution, what plugins does this browser have, what fonts will it render, and you get back a unique identifier. And so the bad guys who have all of these tricks, sneaky things they can do to your browser to track you, can win this kind of arms race. And our attitude to this is, look, if we have to fight an arms race, Privacy Badger is ready for that. But we'd prefer to live in peace and actually figure out a way to not be fighting arms races, to get a policy escape valve from that. So we view do not track as the policy part of a solution here. Do not track is a header that your browser can send to a website or a third-party website saying, DNT1, do not track this browser without its permission. And the theory was we can't solve all of these complicated fingerprinting supercookie problems necessarily, but we can send a clear message to the company saying this user did not consent to being tracked, and then it's a policy obligation on the part of that company to respect it. Now, what we saw, and there's a long and dirty backstory to this, is for a brief